Hey, one of the most significant but misunderstood chapters in the Bible is Matthew 24. It's a treasure trove for almost all modern speculations about the end of the world. Some say that Jesus described in details the uh, events of this generation, the one we're living in today. Some divide the chapter into two discordant mixtures of two subjects: destruction of Jerusalem and the end of time. One of the most important things to determine about the text is in regard to the disciples' question in verse 3. Chapter 23, Jesus had predicted the fall of the city. The disciples heard these remarks, and in response, as they left the temple, they pointed to the magnificent stones and said, how could this be? Some of these stones weigh a couple of 100 tons. How could they possibly be thrown down? Jesus' response, there shall not be one stone standing on another. And this astounded the disciples, and they asked, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of the coming and the end of the age? Most interpretations of Matthew 24 fail because of misconceptions about the disciples' questions. About the coming of the Lord and the end of the age. This causes mistaken ideas to be read into Matthew 24 instead of allowing Christ in the Bible to define its own terms. It may come as a surprise to many that the coming of the Lord and the end of the age are not references to a physical return of Jesus on a literal cloud and the end of time. They are instead well-established Old Covenant concepts. Anytime God acted in judgment, He came. The end of the age refers not to the end of time, but to the end of the Jewish age there in that first century, and was predicted by the Old Covenant. Read Daniel 9. Disciples asked Jesus, what shall be the sign of thy coming? Unfortunately, when modern readers read this, they automatically think of an end of time, coming on literal clouds. It's not the biblical idea of the coming of the Lord. The concept of the coming of the Lord is from the Old Covenant and never carried the idea of ending time. It meant God was going to destroy the world, or that world that was under consideration, and not all of physical creation. In Isaiah 19, it says that God would ride the clouds into Egypt and destroy that nation. Did He do it? Well, not literally, but or bodily. He didn't ride a cloud into Egypt, but in chapter 20 it tells us that the Assyrians did destroy Egypt. God used the Assyrians to do His work. Therefore, He was said to come in the clouds. And Isaiah 34 says that the heavens would be destroyed and the mountains would melt. That sounds like the end of creation, but this is a prediction against Edom. Obadiah predicted the same thing. The Babylonians destroyed Edom. God said He had destroyed them. And Malachi physical creation was not destroyed, but Edom was. Zephaniah said that the day of the Lord was at hand. This was written about 630 BC and predicted Jerusalem's fall, and it fell. Did Jehovah literally bodily come? No, but He used Babylon as His instrument. Therefore, He did come. There's a few Old Testament passages that help us define the day of the Lord. In Matthew 16, Jesus said he was going to come with the angels in glory and judgment before some of those standing there would die. This is the same coming he predicted in Matthew 23 and 24, when he promised to destroy Jerusalem at his coming in that generation. The language Jesus used in Matthew 24 is taken directly from the Old Covenant. Jesus was speaking as a Jewish prophet, using prophetic language, speaking as a Jewish prophet. And the language never intended to be understood literally. It's the great tragedy of modern biblical interpretation that modern methods of interpretation have been imposed on this language. In Matthew 24, Jesus was not predicting, nor were the disciples asking about when Jesus would return to end time. They were asking about the signs of the return to destroy the temple city. And he did this in the first century using the Romans as an instrument. Many believe that the disciples asked Jesus, what shall be the sign of the end of the world? Matthew 24:3, they were asking not about the end of time. The word translated world in the King James is from the Greek word aeonian, and it translates age. Jesus predicted the fall of Jerusalem, and it was to the disciples proof positive of the impending demise of their old world. They knew Daniel had predicted the same event and said by the time it happened, God would bring in everlasting righteousness. Jesus answered the disciples' questions by giving them some signs that would precede the end. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world for witness to all the nations, then cometh the end. Then he spoke of the abomination of desolation. And you have to ask yourself, was the gospel preached in all the world in the first century? If you believe the Bible, it was. In Romans 10:18 and forward, or Colossians 1:6, or Colossians 1:23, or Titus 2:12. The disciples asked for a sign of the end of the age. Jesus said the gospel would be preached. And when they saw the abomination of desolation, to flee. The gospel was preached to the entire world at that time, to every creature, to the whole cosmos. Is it dangerous to say that these promises were not fulfilled? When every word employed in the prediction of that event is used by the inspired writers to say that the predictions had been fulfilled.